Hello, YouTubers, friends, compatriots, bootlickers, shills, dislicers, peasants, vassals, minions. I'm a useful idiot, and since I've been talking about propaganda lately, I've been wanting to do a video about history as propaganda, and because it seems particularly relevant, because even as all these events unfold in places like Ukraine, and Libya, and Egypt, and elsewhere, history is being written as we speak. And of course, it will be revisionist history because it will be state-written history, history written by the victors. And we see that situation now, obviously, in Libya, because we have politicians in this country touting Libya as some sort of NATO success while it continues to descend into chaos and brooding civil war there as we speak. And there's a number of people that have discussed this whole idea of propaganda. History is propaganda. It's nothing new. I think Noam Chomsky described history as a weapon, and philosophers all down the line, from Ricoeur to Foucault, and Marx and Hegel, and even the propagandist, master propagandist himself, and Edward Bernays, all discussed the idea of history being written by the victors, history being written to perpetrate an agenda, and history being used as propaganda. And I think it could probably be summed up best, oddly enough, by George Orwell. He wrote in the book 1984, quote, "He who controls the present controls the past. He who controls the past controls the future," unquote. And that makes a lot of sense, because we see this use of history being used by governments and states all over the globe for these specific agendas. And it's a very conscious effort, too. I know when I first found out about the elites meddling in American education, I was a little skeptical about how far they were willing to go and how much they would invest in it. But looking into it, it's pretty staggering, the effort they put into it and how diabolical it was. And it's a topic for a whole other video, but I will read one quote, and it's from the Rockefeller's Philosophy on Education in the General Education Board's occasional paper number 1. And this is back from the turn of the century. And in it, this is speaking for the Rockefellers. It says, "In our dreams, we have limitless resources, and the people yield themselves with perfect docility to our molding hands. The present educational conventions fade from our minds, and unhampered by tradition, we work our own good will upon a grateful and responsive rural folk," unquote. So that makes it pretty clear what's going on. And this is talking about the Carnegies and the Rockefellers investing huge amounts of money. In fact, they were one of the most major 70 to 80% of funding for higher education in the United States came from foundations like these back at the turn of the century. And so they were able to mold the curriculum, including history, in order to serve the needs of the elites. And there's parallels in other areas of thought as well. Religion is a good example. Religion's been used down through the ages to legitimize the power of the state. What better way than to bring in some sort of divinity? But let's get back to history. I mean, some of the more obvious examples are the fact that we have a real history, what I call a secret history, and then we have the conventional history. And usually they're greatly at odds with each other, in spite of all the documentation and all the evidence. For example, the Vietnam War. The Vietnam War is still doctored in the same terms it has been for the last 40 or 50 years, in spite of the fact that the Tonkin Gulf incident at the start of the war has been completely discredited and is now a well-known false flag event. And yet that's still not taught in history because it doesn't serve the elite's agenda. It doesn't serve this revisionist version of history. And likewise with the Vietnam War and every other war. And World War I, World War II, we don't want to look at events like the Armenian genocide by the Turks around the turn of the century. We don't want to look at the fact that the Spanish-American War was barely a war and that it was all trumped up, and yet we still have history parading the likes of Theodore Roosevelt charging San Juan Hill and the Rough Riders and all this mythology, this statist mythology. And most people, even with the barest minimal education that we get in the United States anymore, still know the basic mythology of these sort of events, even if they have no recollection of all the details. They get the essence, and that's what's most important for an education system using history as propaganda, is for people to get the emotional gist. And this is what creates this mood of American exceptionalism and this very dangerous nationalism that you see in countries all over the world, including America. I consider myself a patriot, but I don't consider myself a nationalist. And I think it's a very dangerous thing. And fortunately for the handlers and the corporations who need drones and cogs in the wheel, Americans do not get an education, so history is barely taught at all, and most Americans are extremely ignorant of even those basic historic facts. And it's really a shame, because there's certainly a lot to be learned from history, and people kind of dismiss it as not relevant to their lives and their times, and yet there's a rich tapestry of what can be learned studying historical events and the interactions of people around the globe throughout history. And but once again, that's a topic for another video. But another part of this whole history as propaganda, of course, is the fact that the world is stocked with monuments and statues and palaces and castles. And this is also part of the tapestry of history. But once again, generally, what we have here are the monuments and statues and palaces and castles that are icons to the elites, the power brokers throughout the ages. Their society lives on, while peasant society is transient. And so that's another thing, though. Let's not forget that when you see places like the pyramids and these grand structures all over the globe going back into antiquity, a lot of times were built by massive slave labor and are essentially icons for huge egos. And so that's another part of how the propaganda, this national pride, we have this national pride in the monuments of our handlers and our elites, and this is part of the quotient. But to get back to history as propaganda, one of the more familiar examples that people use is an excellent example, the whole idea of Columbus discovering America, and the ironies that Columbus never landed in America per se, and that Columbus was also responsible for the massacre of thousands of natives, and then the country's not even named after him; it's named after somebody who drew a map. And then the fact that, like I pointed out earlier, we have all these historical inconveniences like the Armenian genocide, or the fact that Germany was put through the ringer after World War II for all their war crimes, and yet Japan was not held to the same standards. And there's been a lot of resentment over the years that Japan never really officially acknowledges, let alone apologizes for a lot of atrocities and war crimes during World War II. These are inconvenient truths for national mythologies, of which history is used as propaganda. So pretty simple presentation here, but I just wanted to bring it up so that people realize that as these current events unfold in places like the Ukraine, as these events unfold, this new history as propaganda is already being written as these events unfold, and it's part of why a lot of these events unfold the way they do. For example, we have the snipers in Kiev, and if the opposition government is now in control, and they were the ones who provided the agent provocateurs, who were the snipers that made this event unfold. Certainly, it is in their best interest to not follow through, not investigate, and just always leave the mythology where it is now, that somehow it was the Ukrainian government in Yanukovych who fired on the crowd, or that it was Russian agents. Therefore, propaganda history is being written now, and this event will not be documented any further than those who remember it right at this moment. And that's how it works. I'm a useful idiot. Don't you be one too.